The House is now in session. This Honourable House is now in session. Call of the roll.
Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Montague, Mrs. Malawo-Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terrelong, Ms. Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Scott Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Witter is here. Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Goldin, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wright.
Statement by Ministers.
Madam Speaker, I would like to inform this Honourable House of recent upgrades to the PBCJ broadcasting equipment here at Gordon House. Madam Speaker, members will recall that the Public Broadcasting Corporation of Jamaica, PBCJ, serves as the host broadcaster for Parliament, streaming meetings of the House, the Senate and Parliamentary committees live on their television channels and their social media platforms, and providing broadcast feed to other media houses as needed. Recently, the PBCJ were able to fully upgrade the analog equipment that had become obsolete to cutting-edge high-definition equipment. The production control room at the House is now fully equipped with digital equipment, and there are now 6 digital cameras for expanded coverage of the chamber. This was all accomplished with the assistance from the Ministry of Finance and the Appropriation and Aid funding by the PBCJ. Madam Speaker, the equipment was installed and personnel were trained during the Christmas recess. The PCJ began HD standard broadcasts of parliamentary meetings on Tuesday last. I can personally attest to the vast improvement in the broadcast quality of this week's meetings. I ask members to join me in congratulating Mr. Keith Campbell and the team at the PCJ for their achievement, and I look forward to further improvements in the near future. May it please you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are no further statements for the day, so I invite you to continue with the agenda for the day.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are copies of the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on its deliberations on the second supplementary estimate of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31, 2022, and the second supplementary estimate for the Jamaica Public Body's revised estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year ending March 31, 2022.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees.
Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table.
Member Phillips and Chairman for the PAAC, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Body's estimates of revenue and expenditures for the year ending March 31st, 2022.
Thank you,
pleases you,
Member
Madam
Phillips.
Speaker.
Notices of motions given orally. Member Phillips, I'll take you first.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, be it resolved that the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Body's estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, which was laid on the table of the House on the 13th day of January 2022, be adopted. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move. Be it resolved. Be it resolved. With reference to the resolutions approved by this Honourable House on the 29th day of September 2020, appointing a Public Accounts Committee, a Human Resource and Social Development Committee, an Economy and Production Committee, and an Infrastructure and Physical Development Committee, respectively, and in keeping with any subsequent amendments thereto, that each resolution be now amended by inserting the name George Wright. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you, House Leader. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, public business. Chairman, PAAC, Member Phillips.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Chairman,
Thank you,
you
Madam
may start
Speaker.
the debate on the report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The PAAC reviewed the estimate of expenditures on January 12, 2022, and these are our findings and recommendations. The second supplementary estimates 2021-22 amounts to 839.048 billion, representing an increase of 25.772 billion, or 3% above the 867.275 billion that was approved in the first supplementary estimate in October 2021. The largest contributor to the increase is for debt servicing, which increases by 17.58 billion from 280.128 billion to 297.708 billion. Amortization or principal repayments accounts for 12.61 billion of this increase, while interest charges increases by 4.978 billion. Non-debt expenditure, for its part, reflects an increase of 7.2 billion to 575.3 billion relative to the 568.1 billion approved in the first supplementary estimates of 2021-22. The entirety of the increase is in the recurrent expenditure, as capital expenditure is unchanged at 54.2 billion. The Financial Secretary explained that the first supplementary estimates 2021-22 had included a contingency provision within the Ministry of Finance's budget, including the following two amounts. 10.3 billion to support increased salaries for various categories of public sector workers for the period April 1st to March 31st, 2022, in their unfolding negotiations with the government, and 5 billion for additional social assistance to vulnerable groups impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Financial Secretary further explained that the second supplementary estimates reflects the transfer of those resources from the Ministry of Finance and Public Services contingency provision to the ministries, departments and agencies responsible for the executing of care component of the Serve Jamaica program and payments of the 4% salary increase offered to public sector workers for the period. Your committee was informed that to date, some 31 bargaining units among public sector workers had accepted the government's wage offer of 4% plus one-off payments of $40,000 to workers earning less than 1.5 million per year. Your committee raised a number of questions in relation to these and related matters. These included, how will the debt to GDP be reduced in 1 year from 110% to 79%? How and why did Ministry of Finance and Public Service continue to provide funding for Ministry of Education, Youth and Information for 7 years when its accounting practices were clearly in violation of the PAAC Act? When will the outstanding amounts owed to healthcare workers at vaccination centres be paid? And are there no other ways for government entities to resolve issues among themselves over debt instead of hauling each other into court? Your committee also made a number of recommendations. These include Parliament needs to review the sanctions associated with the PAAC Act to ensure that they can be more strictly enforced. The Ministry of Finance and Public Service, Cabinet Office Auditor General and Solicitor General should develop protocols to increase their cooperation and collaboration in enforcing the PAAC Act. Government entities should ensure that all efforts at mediation are exhausted before resorting to the courts to settle conflicts over debt. Government and the private sector needs to strengthen their cooperation to install closed-circuit cameras in town centres and other public places to curb crime, littering and other violations. Parliament needs to reconsider the need for establishing a dedicated funding mechanism for maintaining the nation's roads. The National Solid Waste Management Authority needs to strengthen the commercial aspects of their business to generate more income for their operations. Your committee recommends that strategic plans be implemented to reduce debt at the JUTC and to lessen their dependency on the public's purse. Madam Speaker, it pleases you, that's the end of the report.
Thank you, Member. House Leader, in respect of amendment.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Just to make sure we're clear, would anyone else like to contribute in respect of the debate as it relates to the PAAC report? Just for the record, Member Phillips, may I ask that you just for procedure conclude and we will vote? Just, you would like to contribute, Member Jackson?
Yes, Madam Speaker. May I have permission to speak from a seat other than my own? Just one brief intervention, Madam Speaker, that the chairman made reference of. The settlement of, I think, $185 million between the Ministry of Health and the UDC. I found that for rent, 2 government agencies going to court to settle a claim. The court is the place of last resort to settle disputes. And if 2 government agencies can't sit and resolve matters like this, what example are we setting for the rest of the public that have disputes? Whether it's, in this case, it's a financial dispute to reach a settlement. So I just want to urge the Minister of Finance, who is here, that because the Ministry of Finance, as was said to the Financial Secretary, has overall superintendence over the finances of the country. And we must demonstrate a better disposition to deal with matters. It looks untidy and it doesn't set a good example for the country, us as a people, and the rest of the world. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member Phillips, you may conclude the debate.
Madam Speaker, may we conclude the debate and ask that the motion be approved.
Those in favour? Those against, the ayes have it. House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think you assumed correctly that initially that there was no further contribution to that debate. But I think that it is a very good point that the member from Southern St. Catherine has made with regards to how agencies in the same space can deal with issues. So, Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favour? Those against, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the motion be approved.
The question is that the motion, notice of which the Minister gave earlier, be approved. Those in favour? Those against, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, be it resolved that the second supplementary estimate of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, which were laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of January 2022, be referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all the members of the House, for consideration and report. And be it further resolved that the committee, during its deliberations, take into account the recommendations contained in the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates Jamaica public bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, which was laid on the table of the House on the 13th day of January 2022. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, the Minister. Yes. Public business.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the motion be approved, and that is for the estimates to be referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the item notices of motions given orally be recommitted. Madam Speaker, having dealt with the matter earlier on, I now move that the House be suspended in order for the sitting of the Standing Finance Committee.
Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. The meeting of the House is suspended to allow the Standing Finance Committee to meet. Marshall. The Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, is now convened. Member Brown-Burke will lead us in prayer.
Again. Let us pray.
Committee members, please be quiet for prayer. Committee members, Member Jackson, we are about to pray.
Heavenly Father, we turn to you once again to ask for your continued guidance and your wisdom as we contemplate the discussions to be had here in this Standing Finance Committee. Help us so that we might be fixed on your people and what is of importance to them and what you would like us to do on their behalf. Guide us, protect us, and continue to help us to work together for the good of our people and our country. In Jesus' precious name we pray.
Amen. Members, the House of Representatives, by resolution, referred the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates Jamaica public bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives for consideration and report. In its resolution, the House also directed this committee to take into account the recommendations contained in the report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on those documents. All of the items mentioned above are now before us for our consideration and report. This committee is now ready to start its deliberations, and I now ask the House Leader to inform us how we will proceed. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I respectfully ask that we take all the heads together, since the discussions have already taken place. The PAAC having report extensively on committee. Yeah. I'm so accustomed to be standing. Yes, so that we can take the entire. Yes, we'll ask the questions, but that we do know, that we do recognize that the PAAC, having met, deliberated, and presented a full report, that will obviate the need, I'm sure, for extensive questioning, but that we take the entire subheads together. Yes. May it please you, Madam Chair.
Minister will take the questions. The entire book is being taken as a whole. However, questions are being.
Can I go ahead, Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Minister, I want to start on the expenditure side and look at the debt repayment. 2/3 of the additional expenditure goes to debt repayment. Some of it is due to additional depreciation and also interest rate increases. The first question I would ask, have you, on the assumption that the interest rates continue to go up, and it's likely based on the indicators from BOJ, is the sum that has been allocated sufficient to cover a potential rate increase which may take place in February when the Monetary Policy meets again? Monetary Policy Committee meets again.
Thank you for that question. So there's 17 billion for debt service increase. Of that amount, 12.6 billion is for amortization, increase in the principal payments, and of that 12.6, approximately 8 billion is due to the fact that we paid an NWC obligation that the government guaranteed. We paid it off when it came due. 4.9 billion is due to changes in interest costs, and approximately half of that is attributed to changes in domestic interest rates, and therefore the domestic interest bill, and the other half due to changes in the level of the currency for foreign interest. With respect to the question that you have asked, the amount of the increase ought to take us to the next fiscal year. I mean, to the end of the fiscal year. Remember that the government's interest on domestic debt is linked to the Treasury bill rate. And yes, there is a connection between the policy rate and the Treasury bill rate, but it takes some time for that to feed through. So we have, approximately just over 8 weeks left in the fiscal year, and the amount that we have provided for here is sufficient to take us through, all things being equal. Yeah.
You want a follow-up on that?
Madam Chair, if I could ask a follow-up question on this specific issue. The fact that the additional provision for amortization includes close to 8 billion of what was a contingent liability that turned out to be something that the government actually has to pay out for the Water Commission. First of all, who was the creditor that was being paid out? Secondly, the fact that it wasn't budgeted before indicates that there was not an expectation that the guarantee was going to be called. And how is it that this has arisen, that the debtor, the Water Commission, has had to rely on the government to pay it out this fiscal year when it fell due and it wasn't budgeted for originally? Were you taken by surprise by the requirement to have to pay it out? And thirdly, there was a ministry paper that was withdrawn on Tuesday, which I believe was a ministry paper tabled at the last sitting in December for a facility for the Water Commission. how does that relate to this payout of this $8 billion, and what is going on there?
No, thank you for that. Those are good questions. Thank you for them. So the National Water Commission had a loan outstanding to the Bank of Nova Scotia in the amount of approximately $50 million US, which was guaranteed by the government of Jamaica and replaced a previous loan that was also guaranteed by the government of Jamaica. It was due for repayment in December, and as you would expect, the board of that entity did what it needed to do to engage the institution concerned to refinance that debt. So rather than to pay it out, to negotiate a new debt to replace it once it matured. And that went through all of the processes, including board approval, and it would have even gone through, the fact that it needed a government guarantee, a parliamentary guarantee, went to cabinet, and we had the approvals to provide a guarantee for that loan to be rolled over. Now, during the week of the rollover, we went to market for, I believe, an instrument that might have been 40 years or thereabouts. This was in December. And the pricing, that we got and came back, when we looked at that pricing vis-a-vis the pricing that, NWC had negotiated for, I believe, for 10 years that were, shorter in the region of, there was different tranches, a 7-year tranche, I think I could be a little mistaken here, but I'm just giving an idea, a 10-year tranche, a 14-year tranche, something like that. Given where the government of Jamaica is borrowing, it just wasn't, in our view, we didn't want to renew at those levels, given, the premium to be paid, that is a public body, but it's a public body that's being guaranteed by the government, vis-a-vis where the government is able to borrow in the markets. That difference, we thought wasn't justified in the end, and we had the wherewithal to pay it off, and so that is what we chose to do. And it is those, it is that, level of meticulous sort of management of the country's liability that makes the difference in providing fiscal space. A 1.5 point difference on, a large amount of money makes a difference over a long period of time. So it's good that we were in a position, we had options, we could have refinanced it, but we also had the option to pay it off, and given the cost of refinancing vis-a-vis where the government of Jamaica was able to borrow that same week, we chose to pay it off, and in doing so, we have reduced the foreign exchange component of Jamaica's debt, which is a larger component, and our long-term strategy is to reorient our debt to be, to be comprised more of local currency debt. I mean, that will take some time, and this is a step in that direction.
So the government borrowed the money to pay it out?
No, the government didn't borrow the money to pay it off. The government, we had the prior year cash resources that we were able to use to pay it off.
No, because you were talking about comparing with the cost that the government could borrow at and so on. So
yes, yes. So the government is in the market several times a year, and the funds that we're in the market for that I referred to were, earmarked for other activities. So we, plan to go to the market, months before in order to finance other expenditure. We'd have started the year with cash balances, and those cash balances have been applied on below the line activities throughout the year, and we applied those cash balances to this repayment. The amounts that were raised and I used to explain the benchmark differential, those amounts were programmed for warrant and funding activities long ago, and were used for that. In fact, those monies came in and they were used. But I'm just giving you the reference to speak to the cost of the relative cost of debt financing when the government borrows directly in the market, as opposed to a public body going and negotiating for themselves.
From an accounting perspective, does that represent a loan to NWC from central government that will be carried on the balance sheet of Water Commission as a payable to the government?
No, in this case, we chose not to do it that way. It represents a reduction in the liabilities of the NWC. And so a benefit of that to the NWC is that they'll have more, let's use the word fiscal space or financial space to operate. I mean, NWC, as we know, is constantly under financial duress over a long period of time, and therefore being relieved of this liability and the annual interest cost that is associated with the liability, that provides them with a little breathing room that's represented by the amount of that interest cost.
Is that consistent with the Public Debt Management Act for you to advance funds for a public body and not reflect it as a receivable?
This is a government guaranteed debt, so it falls into a different category.
No, that's governed by the Public Debt Management Act.
Yeah. As a government, to the best of my knowledge, as a government guarantees debt, the way in which we have treated with it is permissible and is, and clearly, sort of makes sense. We're doing a couple of things at the same time. We're reducing the Government of Jamaica debt stock. We're reducing the Government of Jamaica foreign debt stock, and we're also providing, fiscal space to the National Water Commission.
Thank you, Minister.
Minister, following on that decision, is one of the consideration expressly for that approach to dealing with the debt a consideration that there be no concomitant increase in the rates? Is one of the consideration for approaching the debt, NWC's debt, in the way that the ministry has a condition that there not be a rate increase to the consumers?
No,
or to offset one.
No, we separate those issues, member. I mean, that's an operational issue for the National Water Commission and for the ministry in which it is. So we wouldn't intervene into those kind of.
You will agree
matters.
You will agree that it creates space, as you've indicated, that such that the pressures for a rate increase will be lessened.
Yeah, but to be fair to the National Water Commission, though, member, the National Water Commission is under significant pressure when it comes to expenditure to improve the quality of services. So I would be happy if this space created would be sufficient to completely rehabilitate the finances of the National Water Commission, but I'm afraid it will take a lot more than that to do so.
Minister, I was going to follow up just on the NWC. Specifically, by paying this off, how much have you reduced the NWC's debt burden by? And what is the government's overall plan to deal with the huge debt that the NWC has and to make it a viable public entity?
So this debt was approximately $50 million US, so it reduces its liability by that amount. The NWC over a long period of time has accumulated a lot of debt, and it's no secret. It is a distressed public body and one that needs a lot of attention. The government will have to seek ways to, or certainly the NWC will have to seek ways to have private capital involved in the production and storage and maybe even distribution of water, but to do it in a way that recognizes the public good nature of water and the social considerations that underpin water.
There was a 2025 bond which you have paid down on, I think, about $3 billion, $3.4 billion before it's due. Again, just trying to understand what the debt management strategy is. Was that done because you're trying to bring the debt to GDP back into the projected range?
So we're always looking for, we always take advantage of opportunities when we can to reduce the debt stock. Sometimes those opportunities, are not predictable long in advance, but the management of Jamaica's debt stock to achieve our targets is multifaceted. It consists of many considerations and measures, and including maintaining a particular primary balance, but it also includes opportunistically paying off debt when we can. Yeah.
And is that because the rates were attractive? I asked within the context of that money could have been used for expenditures which would aid in growing the economy, which could contribute further to economic growth. So there's always a trade-off when you choose to pay off the debt. So my question would be, or for welfare programs, was it attractive to the government to pay it off at the particular time?
Early, 3 years.
I mean, there is a little misunderstanding there in that if you're to abide by Jamaica's fiscal rules, which we are obligated to, what we describe as above-the-line expenditure, which is expenditure that's financed by revenues, is prescribed. In this case, we did not use current revenues to pay off the debt that we're talking about. We used resources that we carried forward from a previous year, i.e. cash resources, if I'm being clear. So it is not that the choice was to use this $8 billion in budgetary activities for normal everyday expenditure or using it to repay debt. No, 3.4.
Yeah, these are the 25, the 2025 bonds that were prepaid early, 3.4 billion.
Right.
Yeah,
the same principle applies. It's not that we are taking GCT receipt that we received last month and having a choice between, paying current expenditures or repaying debt. Right. So there's a difference between what we call below the line activities and above the line activities. But to answer your question, yes, whenever we repay, it is because the opportunity is a good one, right? Because government activities, you're always sort of borrowing to finance and repaying when it's opportunistic and so forth. And we will continue to be opportunistic as we seek to manage Jamaica's liabilities.
Will this sum reduce the reserves? It's 800 million US. Well, I'm not sure.
Tell me what page you're looking at.
It is 217-2. The bonds are 800 US worth of.
No, what head?
It is
the Ministry of Finance.
217. Public debt service amortization.
Sorry.
217. 20017-2.
Okay. Hold on a second. Let me just find it here. Okay, and look at the page at the bottom. Dash what? Dash 3?
2.
Dash
on
2.
the left-hand side, yeah. About halfway down. Activity project number 11293.
Yes.
So
right.
I was just asking.
So that is, yeah, go ahead.
The description says repayment of US 800 million, 7.625% bond, 2025. So it's a 2025.
So that's a bond that has a coupon of 7.625%.
Yeah.
That was issued when.
So I'm asking, is that payment of 3.4 billion to, I don't know if it's partially repaying this bond or fully. I haven't attempted to do the math on it. But is it going to come out of the reserves to pay down this 800 million, or is it a full repayment of redemption of this bond pre-purchase?
No, this doesn't. This looks like a partial repayment. There's a lot more outstanding, but opportunity came to pay down on some of it. There's a bond in which we're paying a coupon of 7.6. We can now borrow at lower rates. So when those opportunities arise, as long as you're buying it back at a decent enough price, et cetera, a lot of calculations go into it. Then you take advantage of those opportunities.
So that categorization is a little bit misleading. It's really a partial pre-purchase of that bond. I see what you mean. Yeah, it's not repayment of the bond, as it were. That bond
is not extinguishing of the whole thing, right?
All right, still on the expenditure side, shifting a little to the Ministry of Health. can you update us on the status of the arrears to suppliers at the Ministry of Health? When we had the first supplementary, you had made an additional allocation to clear some of those arrears. Can you give us an update on that?
The first supplementary, remember, I think the number was 5 billion that we applied to the arrears, and that dealt a significant blow. I'm using a negative term for positive action, but it reduced the arrears substantially. So much so that for the second supplementary estimates, in terms of the requests that would have come forward from the Ministry of Health, I don't recall any request for any additional resources for arrears. So I take that as good news, but I don't have for you an update as to the precise level of the arrears today. But I will, I can get that at a later date.
All right. Shifting a little to the revenue side, your projected 11 billion inflows to cover part of the 25 billion that you're spending, but your tax intake for the April to November period was a little bit below forecast. I mean, what gives you the confidence that you will in fact get the revenues of the 11 billion?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the November figures that were posted didn't include an amount for bauxite levy of about $2 billion that came in. The preliminary numbers for December, which will be published at on the scheduled date, show that we're back up to where we're on par for December. And in terms of the bifurcation, production and consumption running a little bit below, international trade running ahead. And that is what we are projecting here, that international trade, we are adjusting production and consumption down slightly as vis-a-vis the first supplementary, increasing international trade up, and when the two are combined, we end up with a $4 billion increase overall that we are projecting.
So that would pretty much carry you back to your overall projections. Your revenues would be in line with your projections based on that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I was going to ask you about, I saw a figure in Ministry of Mining that would reflect the bauxite levy, the inflows there?
So I'm not figuring, there's a $2 billion.
There's a $2 billion,
yeah,
okay.
and kudos to the former minister. There's a $2 billion for bauxite levy that was owing that
was paid?
That was paid, yeah.
Okay.
Which is...
So to be clear, so you're having $25 billion of additional recurrent expenditure, of which some of that is below the line, some of it is above. The interest is above, and the 7 billion or so. Yeah, the 12 is below. Oh, right, which is 12 out of the 25. Correct. Okay. So you have about 13 additional recurrent above what you'd originally or previously budgeted for. And how do you plan to finance that? What's the plan for financing?
So the financing of, well, let's talk about the whole 25. The financing of the whole 25 is 11 from additional revenue. The additional revenue consists of additional tax revenue, additional non-tax revenue, and an additional non-tax revenue consists of distributions from public bodies, of one or two public bodies that are listed, and so you have that component. The second component is the use of cash resources, and that's about 9 billion, and then I think that's what 9 and 11, that's 20, and then there's a 5 billion from loan receipts. Yeah.
Anticipate at the end of the fiscal year, at this point, that the debt to GDP ratio for the country will be about what?
Yeah, that's what we're working on. As I said when I was speaking in March, the 110 is not a level to play around with. So we're on at this point in time. It could change.
You've had some growth.
Huh?
You've had some GDP growth.
Yes, absolutely.
So that should help the ratio.
Yes. Yeah. So we're looking at just under 97% at this point in time. Yeah, under 97, which is from 110 to 97 would be a big reduction, and hopefully that's where we land up.
Minister, I see where that there's an additional amount for the Ministry of Health for $3.4 billion. There are two questions I want to ask in relation to that. I know the Minister of Health has been promoting the improvements at the University Hospital, Spanish Town, Maypen, St. Anne's Bay. I don't see anything in the budget as it relates to that, and that has been part of the current activities. Can you say where that is, or if it's whatever? Secondly, I think the opposition spokesman on finance may ask as well, but I will do as I'm here. What is the, have any of the arrears in health been paid down? Oh, you did? When? Oh, I was engaged in a sidebar then if you did. I didn't hear, so I'm interested to know.
So I'm glad you're paying attention, member, that the government is planning, and the efforts of the Minister of Health are to be acknowledged in this regard, a major program of rehabilitation and building of new hospitals and health centers over the next few years. That program will get off the ground in earnest, and this is in addition to and outside of what's happening in Montego Bay with Cornwall and so on. It will get underway in the next fiscal year. So in March, we'll talk about that.
That's the EU IDB partially funded project.
That is it, correct. And he walks in, he heard you.
Yes, and could you, although you mentioned it, the arrears.
Yes.
No.
Yes, so yes, the member from St. Andrew, Southeast St. Andrew, asked the question moments ago, and what I said was, in the first supplementary, we provided $5 billion for arrears in the Ministry of Health, and that reduced the arrears substantially. It did not eliminate them, but it reduced them to what is normal, meaning that you have a certain number of days to pay, right? And for the second supplementary estimates, our dialogue with the ministry didn't indicate that that had again become a problem, right? So I don't have a precise update as to what the level is today, but to the best of my knowledge, the allocation made in the first supplementary has gone a long way in addressing what was an acute problem.
Minister, I hear you, but the concern on the ground is that there are still some long outstanding payments, and I am a bit disappointed that you said, not from your perspective, but that it did not come from the ministry that there was any concern at that particular point in time for you to have made allowances in this second supplementary estimate. The challenge, though, is that there are still significant amounts owing and by suppliers, and some have exceeded the normal time that you would 30, 60, 90 days, and it may pose a problem for the continued functioning of the health sector.
So, remember how we, as you know, how we manage this, in aggregate. And the first order of business is to pay off the credit balances that are over the period extended by creditors. And so all over 90-day balances at the Ministry of Health have been paid off. Okay? And we tend to call things that are overdue over 90. All over 90-day balances have been paid off. Now, sometimes, remember, you have reconciliation issues. Yes, exactly. Okay? And reconciliation issues are not to be confused with overdue balances. And a reconciliation issue arises where a supplier says, hey, you owe me X. And the Ministry of Health says, no, my records show I owe you Y. And the rules and the laws of our country are such that the government officials have to be convinced through our reconciliation process as to what the right figure is before a payment can be made. So, so all over 90-day balances, well, that's what they're there for, right? But that's what, no, all over the 90-day balances were paid off, and we're going to aim to keep it that way.
Minister, you had indicated that in the financing of the 25 billion, some of it is cash that is coming by way of distributions from public bodies. Could you elaborate on which public bodies are you expecting and how much money is it?
So we got there's $1 billion from the Heart Trust. There was approximately just over $1 billion from the Jamaica Customs agencies, approximately $250 million from Betting, Gaming and Lottery Commission, and that would constitute about 80% of the amounts.
And of course, that customs agency amount is not revenue. That is that's cash that
that's
they
cash.
have.
You remember,
that's their cash. Their
custom,
money.
yes, it's an executive agency. You know, one of the things with government is, right. And my job from time to time is to, because if it stays, you know,
they might do other things with it.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that it's efficient to harness all the resources and apply to problems.
Minister, just since the former, neither the current Minister of Transport is in the House now, but the issue of the JUTC, you know, coming out of the committee meeting yesterday, I mean, I asked the question, we're subsidizing, according to the FS, over $5 billion this year to the JUTC in subsidy. And by all reports, they're rolling out half of the bus that is required, 450. They're rolling out about 225, 228. But yet still, after a $5 billion subsidy, we're still giving an additional $150 million to the JUTC. You're bringing in less revenue, probably about 60% less than the annualized. You know, is there an overall plan of the government itself where the JUTC is concerned? Because you proposed in one of your budget presentations in purchasing some buses for the JUTC. With all the supply chain challenges, I'm sure the cost of those buses are probably 50 to 100% more. When the fleet that is there now is over 10 to 14 years old, what from your office, is there going to be an analysis being done on the Jamaica Urban Transit Company moving forward, or are we going to ask taxpayers to continue to dump the same amount of resources in the JUTC annually?
Thank you for that question, member. As you know, the JUTC has two principal sources of revenue. One source is the government subvention, and the other source is fare, right? And the government, you know, took the bold decision to increase fares this year, having not been increased for 7 years. You know, the next time we're going to ask you to come at the press conference when those things are being discussed, and for you to voice your support as you are, you know, given the nature of your vigilance over these matters. So, you know, it's a tough situation. We had planned to buy the new buses. The pandemic came. We had to delay and defer. But we are going to hope to revisit that matter. And hopefully in the next fiscal year, we'll be able to do something to increase the efficiency of the JUTC by having equipment that is less expensive to maintain.
But outside of the additional buses, there's an overarching challenge that is faced, because be it that the buses go out, they still can earn no revenue because of the situation of the chaos that we have in the transport sector itself. So I'm just saying that there needs to be an overall look at the public transport sector and systems. The JUTC has billions of dollars in assets. Prior to the pandemic, it was still a loss-making entity. I've been saying for quite a while that we need to do some research, some overall look at the entity itself, in how we make it more efficient. That $5 billion of subsidy on an annual basis, losses of another $5 billion, how it is that we cauterize those losses and reduce the amount of subsidy that needs to happen. But it's not going to just happen alone with additional new buses in the system, but how it is that we look overall at the whole public transport sector. And I'm saying that the time has really come for us to take that look before it is too late and we have no assets at all in the JUTC.
No, given the capacity that responsibilities that I have as Minister of Finance, I share your concerns. Let me just put it that way. And I have no doubt that the outgoing and incoming Minister of Transport share your concerns as well. And, I will, some of what you mentioned, in terms of the strategic direction of the transport sector, are really in the domain of the minister. And I don't want to kind of step into the new minister's territory on that. But just to say, share your concern. But I want you to see that government has also taken the bold decision to address and fares were increased to try and ameliorate the problems at the JUTC. And I know we can count on your support for that.
Thank you. Minister?
So, Madam Chair, before us are some amendments to the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and they relate to the transfer or reallocation of some resources to the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. All right? Some funding to get the Jamaica 60 going, and to, some activities to recognize Reggae Month. Right? I now ask, Madam Chair, that the amendments be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, before us also are amendments to the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Body Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022.
I now ask.
I now ask for these to be approved. No,
Those
that's
in
not.
favor?
No. Sorry. Repeat. Leave that out, Madam Speaker. I want to now put the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, as amended.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now put the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Body Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, as amended.
Minister, just to confirm, as it relates to Jamaica Public Bodies?
No, it's not as amended.
Didn't have an amendment.
Sorry.
Right.
I put the Jamaica Public Bodies revenue estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022.
Thank
Full
you.
stop.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Yeah.
The report on the second supplementary estimates for the financial year ended March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Bodies Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, with all the relevant amendments, is before us. Is it the wish of the committee for me to sign this report? Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. This is saying January 21. That I can amend. House Leader. Report signed. This is the end of committee meeting. We will now go back to the House. Thanks, Marshall. House Leader. The report is being circulated. This Honorable House now resumes its sitting. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, on the recommittal of motions given orally,
Announcements.
we will now proceed. Madam Speaker, I now ask that the items announcements,
Absolutely.
reports from committees, and notices of motions given orally, as where I was going to start,
Perfect. Thank you, House
be
Leader.
recommitted.
Thanks.
Yes, please, Madam Speaker.
Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today are copies of the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31, 2022.
Reports from committees. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022.
Notices of motions given orally. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on its deliberations on the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Body estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, which was laid on the table of the House on the 13th day of January 2022, be adopted. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you. Public Business. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, regarding the adoption of the report of the Standing Finance Committee.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, let me first start by expressing my gratitude to members of this House, to the chairman of to you, Speaker, to the House Leader, to the opposition leader of opposition business, to the chairman of PAAC, and to members of the PAAC and to all members of this House for facilitating procedurally smooth consideration of the second supplementary estimates and efficient with respect to time. Doesn't mean that we agree on everything or that the chairman didn't haul people up, etc., but the fact that that was done in efficient time. And it really, and the report of the PAAC was at a level higher than before, even though it took less time. There's a lesson in all of that for all of us. But I want to really express my sincere thanks, and of course the members of the Ministry of Finance, the opposition spokesman as well, who I spoke to about this. Yeah. So, Madam Speaker, Jamaica is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Statin reported that the economy grew by 5.8% in the quarter ended September 2021. And this exceeds the pace of recovery in our peer group countries in the Caribbean and peer group countries elsewhere. However, we have still not recovered to pre-COVID levels of economic output, but the pace and momentum of the economic recovery so far is very encouraging and suggests that the economy will attain pre-COVID levels of output in real terms in the not too distant future. Sometimes, Madam Speaker, the question is asked, economic growth, what does that mean for me? That's just theoretical mumbo-jumbo you people talking about. What's economic growth? Why is it important? Well, Madam Speaker, this year, more than any other year, demonstrates quite graphically what economic growth means for Jamaicans and why it is important for every single Jamaican. In February, we tabled a budget which had total non-debt and debt expenditure of $831 billion. Because of economic growth exceeding budgetary forecasts, we were able to increase the budget to $867 billion in the first supplementary estimates. And continued growth, along with obviously financing from public bodies to the extent I just shared a while ago, has allowed for the budget to be increased to $893 billion. So in this year alone, economic growth above forecast has delivered over $60 billion of resources beyond what we started the year with, that has been used to provide for the Jamaican people. It is economic growth that has provided the resources with which we've been able to respond decisively to the Ministry of Health's needs for the fiscal support to manage the pandemic. And it is economic growth that has provided the resources to which we've been able to increase and broaden the Serve Jamaica program, providing assistance to vulnerable Jamaicans. Now, the level of economic growth that we're projecting for this fiscal year of somewhere between 6% and 10% for the whole fiscal year will moderate next year. And so this kind of budgetary expansion should not be expected as the norm. However, we expect growth to continue, and Madam Speaker, we have demonstrated this year in no uncertain terms that economic growth matters for every single Jamaican. Now, Madam Speaker, during the first supplementary estimates, we announced an additional $5 billion for the care component of the Serve Jamaica program. Since that time, Madam Speaker, approximately 130,000 Jamaicans who head path households have received a care grant of $10,000 at a cost of $1.3 billion. This was executed by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. And in addition to that, approximately 57,000 Jamaicans who are in receipt of an NIS pension below $15,000 a month have also recently received a care grant of $10,000 at a cost of $570 million, again executed by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. And 5,000 Jamaicans who are on a social pension have received a grant of $10,000 at a cost of 50 million Jamaican dollars. Madam Speaker, this represents a total of 1,000 Jamaicans from east to west, north and south, who have recently received grants from the government of Jamaica. Now, Madam Speaker, the second supplementary estimate allocates to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security the amounts that were reserved for this expenditure. Madam Speaker, in the first supplementary estimates, I announced the provision of $1 billion for care food packages for vulnerable Jamaicans who may not be in any formal database in response to inflationary pressures being experienced, particularly with respect to the cost of food and related to the global supply chain issues that have affected countries around the world. Madam Speaker, December inflation in the United States was at the highest level in over 40 years, and it was at a level of about 7%. But it's not only the United States that has experienced this level of inflation. The G20 group of economically and socially, the most advanced economically and socially countries in the world, also experienced record levels of inflation. For instance, December inflation for some G20 countries included Argentina was at 49%, Brazil at 10%, Canada 4.7%, Germany 5.3%, the UK 5.1%, India 5.6%, Mexico 7.4%, Russia 8.4%, Turkey 36%, South Africa 5.5%. Madam Speaker, this is a global problem, and we in Jamaica are not immune to it. The government has delivered on $259 million of the $1 billion care food package program in the form of allocations of $189 million to the Constituency Development Fund and providing $3 million for Member of Parliament. It was announced on the last day of Parliament last year, and members of Parliament who have not yet made use of these resources are encouraged to do so as they expire at the end of the fiscal year in about just over 8 weeks. In addition, there was $70 million made available to the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development for councils for the same purpose. And these are formalized in the second supplementary estimates. The balance of the $1 billion program, Madam Speaker, is the amount of $741 million that is now being made available through the second supplementary estimates to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for a program that they will implement. And this program, Madam Speaker, which the Minister of Labour will speak to in more detail, will use electronic infrastructure and electronic payment system to, instead of providing care packages in a formal, in a physical sense, will provide grants of up to $10,000 to needy Jamaicans, but will do so in collaboration with civil society, including the Red Cross and the United Way, pastors, preachers, even members of Parliament who refer needy Jamaicans to the Ministry of Labour. They'll have their own criteria, and the Ministry of Labour will sign those individuals up and make, using a platform that they've used for other such payments, intervene in the Jamaican space so that vulnerable Jamaicans can have some kind of support during these times when prices have been moving. And so this $741 million will complete the $1 billion program that the government has to provide for vulnerable Jamaicans at this time. And I expect the Minister of Labour and Social Security to say more about this shortly. Madam Speaker, high levels of property tax delinquency have long been a reality in Jamaica, even before COVID-19. And this is not acceptable. And maybe because of our history as a property-less people, we have had an ambivalent attitude over time to forcefully getting tough on property tax delinquency. And this has not served us well, Madam Speaker. And we'll probably have no choice in the future to to look at this and to ensure that we can increase levels of compliance as far as property tax is concerned. I am advised by the tax office that if I'm advised by the tax office that property tax collection is expected to yield about 80% of what would be yielded if all property owners paid their tax, and after adjusting for the parcels of land for which property tax ought not to be charged, such as land owned by public authorities and other exempted entities. Some of the statistics that we've used in the past have included the thousands of parcels owned by public entities and the NLA and so forth who are not supposed to pay property taxes, and that has confused the statistic and made Jamaicans look worse than they actually are. The tax authorities advise me that the true number is more like 80%, but that 20% is still a large number when you compare it to other tax types. Now, Madam Speaker, property taxes go to the parochial revenue fund, and not the consolidated fund. And it is a parochial revenue fund that provides the resources for the Ministry of Local Government to finance streetlights and the collection of garbage and so forth. And what has been happening, Madam Speaker, is that property tax yield has been less than what we want it to be, and so that the resources available to the parochial revenue fund are insufficient to meet the related obligations. And as a result, this consolidated fund has to step in. Now, there is some degree of inequity kind of built into that, and it's not something that we should, for a long time, accept as normal. Madam Speaker, against this background, these supplementary estimates include an allocation from the consolidated fund for expenditure that really should be undertaken by the parochial revenue fund in the form of budgetary support for the National Solid Waste Management Company in the amount of $310 million for public cleansing and for improving of garbage collection, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, though overall levels of crime are down and the rate of homicides and depravity, though overall levels of crime are down, levels of crime, the rate of homicides is up, and the depravity and brutality associated with those particular crimes is a deep source of concern to all Jamaicans, and rightfully so. Madam Speaker, it's a complex and challenging problem that has been with us for far too long. Adequacy of funding for the Ministry of National Security and the police has to therefore be and remain a strategic priority. As such, Madam Speaker, outside of provisions for increases in salary, approximately $1 billion is being provided to the Ministry of National Security and the police for a range of expenditures that include motorbikes to improve the mobility of the police. And this is just expenditure for the next 8 to 10 weeks, $1 billion, right? Motorbikes to improve mobility, police supplies, including armored vests and stores that police value, ICT hardware, furniture and equipment, purchase of land for the divisional headquarters of the St. Catherine Division, as well as coastal grid radar power supply for the JDF to allow us to operationalize those radar systems and to improve our domain awareness, as well as other expenditure. Now, Madam Speaker, it is a matter in the public domain with respect to the police that there is a matter that's actually before the courts, and out of respect for the courts, I'll not speak to that matter at this time. It is a matter with some history that predates me as minister, that predates this administration. However, as I've done in the past since I was brought into this matter last September, a dignified silence is the preferred approach. However, Madam Speaker, we look forward to engaging with the police on the compensation review, which we hope to make effective, which we hope to begin in April, or begin with an effective date of April, is what I meant to say, and to wrap up outstanding matters relating to 2021-2022. The police represent the backbone of Jamaica's domestic security. They are the vanguards who are on the front lines of a very difficult challenge. And notwithstanding positions on historical matters that may vary, the police have the absolute and unequivocal support of the government of Jamaica. Sometimes small issues, outside of what I was alluding to just now, sometimes small issues, long endured, become large and seemingly insurmountable in times of pressure. And, you know, if the Minister of National Security were here, I would say to him that, you know, we'll work together and I'll support you in sorting out the small niggling issues from time to time that arise. Madam Speaker, the principal motivation, however, of the second supplementary estimates is to allocate the amounts reserved for increases to the public sector for the 21-22 fiscal year to the ministry, departments and agencies responsible for making these payments. Last year, the economy contracted by 10% and the revenues of the government declined by over $75 billion. In light of this, the government of Jamaica was not in a position to begin implementation of the compensation review in March 2021 as previously planned. I therefore approached the unions before the budget was tabled in February 2021 and proposed delaying the implementation of the compensation review by a year and implementing a modest increase in its place in this fiscal year. Madam Speaker, responsible policymaking and the maintenance of sustainable finances, even in the face of a historic economic shock, this kind of approach is essential to a quick economic recovery and to the long-term well-being of the Jamaican people. The dialogue with the public sector unions continued throughout the year, and I'm pleased that 31 unions representing just under 80,000 public sector employees have formally accepted the government's offer of a 4% increase, along with one-off payments according to a set formula. We expect that this number will increase. This number of persons who have accepted the government's offer will increase by the end of the fiscal year. Madam Speaker, it's important to acknowledge that in the face of the most profound economic shock in our history and the sharpest economic contraction in our lifetimes and in our history as well, the government of Jamaica offered increases to public sector employees in 2020 and in 2021. That is not to be taken for granted, Madam Speaker. We are proud, Madam Speaker, of the fact that we did not come with any suggestion of a wage freeze. And, Madam Speaker, unlike our peer countries, including many countries in the Caribbean, who struggled to meet their pay bills at the end of the month, and who were not in any position to offer any increase at all, Madam Speaker, we are proud of the fact that we've been able to offer modest increases to the public sector, though we acknowledge the modest nature of it under the circumstances. Though 150,000 Jamaicans lost their jobs in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, none of these COVID job losses occurred in the public sector. So, Madam Speaker, it may not be a lot under the circumstances. I just went through the inflation numbers in the G20. Inflation numbers in Jamaica are not dissimilar. And we know fully well that this increase does not make everyone whole. But at least we are able to offer an increase, whereas other countries are stuck paying their public sector employees what they were paying them in 2019 and 2018. We are at least updated for 2020 and updated for 2021 in spite of the pandemic. So, Madam Speaker, the supplementary budget includes other items of expenditure, which I would have alluded to in my initial statement when the supplementary estimates were tabled and which don't require a repetition. But suffice to say that Jamaica indeed is recovering from the pandemic and recovering in a way that has allowed us to make resources available to the Ministry of Health to deal with the effects of the pandemic and to provide for vulnerable Jamaicans, even, Madam Speaker, as we also seek to ensure that public sector employees enjoy some measure of an increase, though that increase is less than we would have wanted it to be. So, Madam Speaker, I thank you for presiding over the special sit-in to allow these supplementary estimates to be considered and to be debated. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, all Jamaicans should be happy and acknowledge the level of growth that we have had in the economy over this year. It's always important to put it in the context of having had a decline of 10% the previous year. And even at the 6 or the 7 or the 8% which we may get to, we certainly won't be back at pre-COVID levels. And it's also important to acknowledge, while we have been able to do something for our public sector workers, the 4% still falls significantly below what our inflation rate has been. But I accept, in the context of the global conditions and certainly regionally, we have been able to do something. I think it's important going forward as we move to recover fully from COVID, that we emphasize how we can put in place measures to grow the economy and in particular our export sectors. And the export sectors that I would refer to are manufacturing and agriculture. We will have the one-off close to a V-shaped recovery, but after this year, we're going to fall back into the 1 and the 2% growth rate, which has been our average for the last 40 years. The only way we can get out of that is to place more emphasis on those sectors while investing a lot to recover from the education fallout. And I look forward to, when we get to the budget, the specific plans around that. Because I would say, outside of the crime challenge, there's no greater priority that we have as a nation than to ensure that those 150,000 or more children who have been totally lost are tracked down and are provided with the kind of support that they can become meaningful citizens. Minister, I was happy to hear your words around the importance of the police. And I want to spend a little time on that. All public sector workers are important, the healthcare ones in particular. But given the nature of the criminality, and just looking at the last 24, 48 hours, we move into a different level of depravity in the country. Our police force remains demotivated and demoralized, by and large. And I hope that the government can match the words with tangible actions. The minister has said that the compensation review will start in April. It is difficult for a constable who earns before tax $70,000 a month, before tax, who is engaging criminals with M16s and AK-47s. And if he responds, he's hauled by Indicom, has to retain counsel at significant cost, and maybe put on interdiction. Those are their realities. And so we have a situation where your rank and file, the people at the front of the struggle to deal with the level of criminality, which has heightened without a doubt, they need to feel in tangible ways that the government supports them. And I want to emphasize, I know there's a court matter, and the minister says rightly not to speak on that issue. But we have to find ways to deal with the issues which affect our policemen and women so that they can feel that the government have their back when they go out there to take on the criminals. The opposition will meaningfully support measures that we believe in the best interest of the country. We'll provide our critical feedback when we feel it is not, but we all recognize that Jamaica is at a critical juncture, and it is the collective effort of not just us here, but all Jamaicans that will get us through this difficult period. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I must say that there's hardly a word that the opposition member said a while ago that I disagree with. In fact, I don't disagree with anything that he just said. He's absolutely right that, and that's the kind of, I would love to entertain. That's where the debate needs to shift to. You know, some of the debates that we have had in the past, not personally me or personally him, but in Jamaica, you know, really are not debates that are going to take us anywhere. The real issue, instead of talking about the currency this or the currency that, the real issue is the challenge to increase foreign exchange flows into Jamaica by making Jamaica a place where export of goods and services, which includes tourism, can grow and increase. And remember, it's absolutely correct that after, after we recover to pre-COVID levels of economic output, the challenge is going to be to ensure that we can elevate levels of economic growth. Now, to that, I would say to the member, that what we're doing is trying to put in place, apart from the structural changes to improve productivity of capital and of labor, we're definitely pursuing projects that can lead to major investments in Jamaica, including the RFP that is now out for integrated resorts, including major PPPs that we're working on and so forth. But I absolutely agree that where the action needs to be is measures that are designed to increase in a sustainable way our exports of manufacturing and agricultural goods, which is not an overnight thing, but it changes, we need to implement policy that can lead to that in time. The education loss, absolutely right as well, and that is something that is of concern to Jamaica and all countries in our hemisphere. That at the end of the day, the quality of the labor force that we have, and by quality what I mean is the ability of that labor force to attract compensation by virtue of its productivity, is key and central to elevating our levels of growth. And, we were in a difficult position to begin with, and that challenge has been made worse with the loss of education, and we will be challenged to address that, and I agree with the opposition spokesman on that. With respect to the police, just reiterating what I was saying, that the government is definitely share the view that the police are essential to Jamaica's security and essential to Jamaica as a country progressing. And the problem that we face in crime, for which they are on the front line, is complex and is difficult, is challenging, it can be demotivating. And the police needs to know, and I'm reiterating it here as the Minister of Finance, not that we 150% support the police. And as I said before, sometimes the things that certainly have come to my attention from time to time, small things, right, that lingered for time, and because government is so sometimes impersonal and huge, and it takes coordination to solve small problems, they accumulate. What we're going to do is list them, and we're going to tick them off, even though we have other issues that might be big issues, right, that still have to be resolved. What we want to do with compensation, though, Madam Speaker, is because we have all of these allowances, people always refer to their basic salary as if that is their overall income, and the constable is not paid, the salary of the constable, is what it is. But in addition to salary, there are allowances as well. So I just want to, the figure quoted, I think, was the basic salary, but when you add allowances, it's a little more than that. But nonetheless, the point, I think, being made is an accurate one, that given the the nature of the risks that are faced. It's a problem that is long overdue to be addressed, and we hope to be able to begin the addressing of that in the next fiscal year with the compensation review. Madam Speaker, I ask that the motion be approved.
The question is that the second supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, as amended, and the second supplementary estimates, Jamaica Public Bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader.
So, I just wanted to alert the House to the plans in relation to the prorogation and the program for the opening of Parliament and the subsequent debates to ensue. Madam Speaker, it is intended to prorogue the House on Monday, February 7th, and for the ceremonial opening of Parliament to be on Thursday, February 10, 2022, right here at the George William Gordon House. And then for Standing Finance Committee to be Tuesday, March 1, Thursday, March 3, and I hope not leading up to Friday, March 4. In the normal run of things, we should finish the business of going through the details of the appropriations statement that is presented to us in 2 days. And then, Madam Speaker, to start the budget debate on Tuesday, March 8th, and Thursday, March 10th, Tuesday, March 15th, Thursday, March 17th, and close on Tuesday, March 22. Further details, Madam Speaker, will be given at subsequent sitting of this Honourable House. Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business for the day. I therefore invite you to adjourn this Honourable House until Tuesday, January 18th at 2 p.m. at the George William Gordon House. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Those in favor? Those opposed? The ayes have it. This Honourable House now stands adjourned.
Jamaica, home of the resilient, passionate and hard-working. A people and a nation who have achieved and defied all odds, working to keep their economy growing, their country thriving, from investments made in innovative opportunities and exports demanded globally. We have a vision, now within our grasp, where Jamaica becomes the place of choice to live, work, raise